Welcome back to our channel, where we delve into the darkest corners of history. Today, we're journeying 20 miles off the Pembrokeshire coast of Wales to a tiny, treacherous outcrop of rock known as Smalls Island. Atop this lonely rock stands a lighthouse, a beacon of safety for sailors. But for two men in 1801, it became a living tomb. This is the chilling and true story of Thomas Griffith and Thomas Howell, a tale of isolation, madness, and a tragedy so grim it changed maritime law forever. It's a story that would later inspire modern horror, including Robert Eggers' acclaimed film, The Lighthouse. So, batten down the hatches as we uncover what really happened at the Smalls Island Lighthouse. In the late 18th century, being a lighthouse keeper was one of the loneliest jobs imaginable. For months on end, you were cut off from the world, with only the howling wind and the crashing waves for company. The Smalls Lighthouse, perched precariously on its rocky base, was particularly notorious. It was a place where storms could rage for weeks, making any rescue or resupply impossible. In 1801, the two men tasked with keeping this vital light burning were Thomas Griffith and Thomas Howell. Accounts suggest they weren't just colleagues, they were known rivals. They had a history of arguments and animosity, a dangerous dynamic for two people forced into extreme isolation together. In that tiny claustrophobic space, surrounded by an unforgiving sea, their personal conflict was a ticking time bomb. The duty rota at the Smalls was brutal. The two men would spend months together, with no one else for company. The psychological toll of such profound solitude is immense. Imagine it. The same face, day in and day out, with no escape. For Griffith and Howell, who already disliked each other, this forced proximity must have been a special kind of torment. Every disagreement, every minor annoyance, would have been magnified 100-fold by the echoing emptiness of their surroundings. Their animosity festered in the damp, salty air. This wasn't just a workplace issue. It was a recipe for disaster. The constant tension and mutual distrust created a volatile atmosphere, where the line between sanity and madness was perilously thin. Then, the unthinkable happened. During their watch, Thomas Griffith suffered a bizarre and fatal accident. Details are murky, but it is believed he was struck by a rogue wave or slipped while working on the exterior of the lighthouse. He was grievously injured and died shortly after. This left Thomas Howell in an absolutely terrifying predicament. He was now alone on that desolate rock, miles from civilization, with the dead body of his rival. But his immediate fear wasn't just of the solitude or the storms. It was of the law. Given their well-known arguments, Howell was convinced that if he simply disposed of Griffith's body at sea, any passing ship that discovered him alone would assume he had murdered his partner. The fear of the gallows was as real and present as the waves crashing against the rock. Trapped by fear and circumstance, Howell made a desperate decision. He couldn't bury Griffith, as there was no soil. He couldn't cast him into the sea for fear of being accused of murder. So, he decided to preserve the body as evidence of his innocence. He constructed a makeshift coffin from salvaged pieces of wood. He then placed Griffith's remains inside and lashed the crude box to the outside railing of the lighthouse's lantern gallery. He hoped that when the relief boat eventually arrived, the body would prove he had no hand in Griffith's death. It was a logical, if gruesome, solution born of pure panic. But this act would set the stage for a new, psychological horror that Howell could never have anticipated. Weeks turned into a month, then 2, then 3. Violent storms battered the Welsh coast, preventing the relief boat from reaching the Smalls. For all that time, Thomas Howell was utterly alone. Alone, except for the constant grim reminder of his dead companion, lashed just outside his window. Every time he went to tend the light, he would see the makeshift coffin. The relentless wind and salt spray began to take their toll on the wooden box. The planks warped and broke apart. As the coffin disintegrated, Griffith's body became exposed to the elements. Howell watched in horror as his former partner's remains began to decay right before his eyes. The psychological torment this inflicted upon Howell is almost unimaginable. The wind, which constantly howled around the lighthouse, would catch the tattered clothing on Griffith's body, making his arms seem to wave. In his isolation-addled mind, Howell perceived this as Griffith beckoning to him, a ghostly gesture from beyond the grave. The decaying corpse became a haunting specter, a permanent fixture in his waking nightmare. He couldn't escape it. The sight, the smell, the constant presence of death, just feet away, all while battling storms and solitude, began to shatter his sanity. He descended into a state of madness, haunted by what he had seen and what he had done to survive. He reportedly spent his days frantically signaling to passing ships, but the storms were too severe for anyone to approach. Finally, after nearly 4 agonizing months, the weather broke, and the relief boat was able to make its approach to the lighthouse. The crew were immediately struck by how deathly silent it was. When they finally managed to get ashore and climb the tower, they found a scene of pure horror. Thomas Howell was barely recognizable. His hair had turned white, his body was emaciated, and he was raving, a man completely broken by his ordeal. And just outside, they saw the source of his terror, the grotesque, decaying remains of Thomas Griffith, still tied to the railing, picked apart by the seabirds and the weather. The relief crew were so disturbed by Howell's state and the gruesome scene that they could barely speak to him. They brought him back to the mainland, but he was never the same man again. The horrific tale of the Smalls Island tragedy sent shockwaves through the maritime community. It became a stark and undeniable testament to the psychological dangers of isolation. The incident prompted an immediate and permanent change in policy. Trinity House, the authority responsible for lighthouses in the region, decreed that no lighthouse would ever again be manned by a crew of just 2. From that point on, all rock station lighthouses were required to have a 3-man crew. This simple change ensured that if one keeper fell ill, died, or became incapacitated, there would still be another person present to provide support, prevent loneliness from turning into madness, and ensure no one was ever left alone with a corpse for months on end. The tragedy of Griffith and Howell became a catalyst for improving the mental welfare of keepers across the nation. The story of the Smalls Lighthouse tragedy didn't just change regulations. It seeped into our collective consciousness. It became the ultimate cautionary tale of the sea, a story whispered among sailors and told around firesides. This gruesome event has been retold and reimagined countless times in literature, plays, and most recently, on film. The 2019 movie The Lighthouse, directed by Robert Eggers and starring Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson, draws heavily from this real-life tragedy. While the film is a work of fiction and mythology, its core themes of isolation, rivalry, and descent into madness are lifted directly from the ordeal of Thomas Howell and Thomas Griffith. The story serves as a powerful reminder of the immense psychological pressure faced by those who keep the lights burning along our most desolate coastlines. It ensures that the sacrifice of those two men on that lonely rock will never be forgotten. The Smalls Island Lighthouse still stands today, now automated and unmanned, but it remains a haunting symbol of maritime history, a monument to the courage and the suffering of the keepers who once called it home. The story of Thomas Griffith and Thomas Howell is a chilling, tragic piece of our past, a testament to the raw power of the sea and the fragility of the human mind when pushed to its absolute limit. It reminds us that behind every beacon of light, there can be a story of profound darkness. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. If you found this story as fascinating and haunting as I did, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into historical mysteries. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next one.